So we want to get you more involved, so come on down, Nancy. Kathleen, stand by. We may ask you to join us here. But Kim Porter has not yet been introduced to you. If you were here last night, you heard Dr. Osler talk about the Populist Party and the People's Party movement in the period between 1892 and the turn of the century. It was a wonderful keynote. Here's a chance to engage him a little bit more. Kim Porter is a professor of history at the University of North Dakota. She's had a lot to do with our programs and documentary films that we've done. So since you haven't had a chance really to say anything, would you talk for a few minutes to set the table? You can stay there or you can go there, whichever you prefer.
Well, I guess I've got some notes that
yeah, go ahead.
Might make it a bit easier.
So we'll just stand by here.
And I'll try to keep, I'll try not to do the 19-hour
The filibuster?
Yes, that might limit my popularity a bit. There's one of the special joys about coming after individuals like Kathleen and Nancy and Jeff is that indeed sometimes you can just say, well, rather than explaining it, remember what they said. So at a couple times I'll say, remember what they had to say, because clearly they've said it better than I can, and you don't need to have it repeated to you. You're not freshmen for the most part. So what I have an interest very much so in the Nonpartisan League, and I'm looking forward a great deal to this afternoon's presentation by Clay on the Nonpartisan League, not only because of what the party became, but what it could have become, and in some senses what great opportunities that were squandered, and that's another topic for another time. But given that we are focusing our attention this couple 3 days on Theodore Roosevelt, it seems worthwhile to talk about Theodore Roosevelt and the NPL. And I would just start out that one of Roosevelt's last performances as a public figure. He's, as some have mentioned, he's getting a bit older. His body is starting to respond to malaria, to an infected leg from his trip on the Amazon. He's blind in one eye. By most definitions, well, he's a little on the portly side, and he's probably on the decline at this time. But one of his last presentations, one of his last public endeavors, is to go on a Liberty Loan speaking tour. Now, this would have been in the late summer, early autumn, September and October of 1918. And at first he says, no, I'm older, I just don't want to do this. He declines to participate in the off-year elections to any significant state. But finally, something clicks and he determines that he is going to do the Liberty Loan tour, and he's going to go through Midwest, West, and he speaks in such places as Billings, Montana. He's in Nebraska. He's in Ohio, part of the tour. He's also in Billings, Montana, which is probably where he makes his biggest foray against the NPL, although he'll do the same pretty much in Bismarck as well as in Minneapolis a few days later. But as he's doing this tour, speaking for the Liberty Loan, and you'll know that we know that the war is only a month and a half, 2 months to go, the entire time, every photograph, he has a black armband on one arm, and that's reflecting the fact that his son Quentin, his youngest, and I don't think by any stretch of the imagination his most favorite child, his most promising one. If Bob Jr. Carried a heavy weight, I think Quentin carried a fairly heavy weight. But Quentin, the darling, the youngest, had been lost in a dogfight in Europe and had died on July 14 of that year, July 14, 1918, and clearly Roosevelt is waylaid. He's absolutely uncertain about what he's done. At times, he's heard to be saying, "Oh, poor Quentikins! Oh, poor Quentikins! You know, my poor baby. How am I and his mother ever going to get beyond this?" And at one time, of course, he had encouraged his sons to get in and to be blooded, as he said, because that would make them real men, to be blooded for their nation. And indeed, Archie and Kermit, two of his other sons, had been blooded. Archie to the place that there was some fear that he might not live. Kermit had been so eager to get to war that he had joined the British Armed Forces. Ted Jr.'s been injured. Ted Jr.'s wife, to confuse the world, also another Eleanor Roosevelt, had served with the YMCA in Europe, as had his daughter and son-in-law served with the YMCA in Europe as a physician and a nurse. So he's got the entire family involved in this, and I don't know that he ever truly felt in his heart of hearts that potentially his son, or one of his sons, could die. But he says almost immediately to the press, after they learn that Quentin has passed, he has had his crowded hour. He's got to be... He's got to live the highest that can be to be lived, which is to sacrifice for your nation. And at this time, he is doing a lot of publishing, not direct attacks on President Wilson or direct attacks on Bob LaFollette, although he does take a few of those. But mostly he uses frequent editorials in the Kansas City Star, as well as in Metropolitan Magazine. And just a brief quote from an article that appeared in the Metropolitan Magazine, which I think is going to stir up, in my mind, in some of the reasons he turned against the NPL quite so forcefully. And this is from the Metropolitan Magazine. Only those are fit to live who do not fear to die, and none are fit to die who have shrunk from the joy of life and the duty of life. Both life and death are parts of the same great adventure. Never yet was worthy adventure worthily carried through by the man who put his personal safety first. Never yet was a country worth living in unless its sons and daughters were of that stern stuff which bade them die for it in need. And he closes out the article with, "These are the torchbearers. These are those who have dared the great adventure." And very shortly thereafter, a collection of his essays comes out called The Great Adventure, or Great Adventures, and it's pretty much a tribute to his son, to Quentin, and this kind of sets the tone. He's a man in mourning. He's a man grieving, and at one time, from the list that Professor Dalton used this morning about how the Progressive Party was lining up and things that Theodore Roosevelt believed in, you could have seen a tremendous number of parallels between the NPL as it's getting started and this list of progressive activities, whether it was direct election of senators, whether it was suffrage, expansion of the electorate, a variety of things that we need not get into, given that the shepherd's crook is around my neck. But he clearly has some interest, some similarities, if you will, with the NPL as it gets started. Indeed, when he goes to speak in Billings, he does so on October, I've lost the date here, in October of 1918, he starts out, yes, rah, rah, rah for the Liberty League, or Liberty Loan, give us money. Well, Montana had already oversubscribed, so this is kind of a false exercise. And as soon as he does his bit for the Liberty Loan, he says of the NPL, that, and I quote, that he had once held, quote, true sympathy for the causes of the League, its purposes and some of its methods. There were some of its methods which I could not approve because I felt it was building up a boss system, a machine as bad as had been the worst of those of the old parties, where they had been at their worst, and as bad as a Socialist Party machine in its ordinary developments, and that's pretty bad. But if you listen to other speeches on that same tour, he does not decry so much the socialist agenda, although he does throw out Lenin and Trotsky and occasionally throws poor Bob La Follette into the mix. If you listen to the rest of his speeches, he often slips into not the socialist aspect, and remember, they had not achieved the major election yet, where they would be controlling the state. That's going to come in 1918 when they when they win the House, the Senate, and the governorship, and really start the socialist agenda in 1919, which by, of course, time Theodore Roosevelt has passed away. But if you look at his speeches, he's not really against the socialist aspect. He'll throw a few bones out there, but what he really goes back to time and time again are individuals that he calls the shadow Huns. And he'd use that term against La Follette after the 1917 speech after the war, or after the declaration of war, and after the presentation at the NPL conference in Minneapolis. But he's very, very direct that the problem is that A.C. Townley and other individuals associated with the NPL are truly opposed to conscription. They're opposed to individuals sacrificing themselves for the war, as of course his son had very recently done, and his other sons and son-in-law had all been blooded in their own way. And I offer you a short quote from Townley, the head of the Nonpartisan League, that he had offered at the day where soldiers, young men, were to do their first registration for selective service. And think of Roosevelt's speech, how great it is to give your life. That's the best you can be as a nation, best you can be as an individual. Townley, just before this, had noted, the nation demands that you give yourselves and your sons, your brothers and your husbands and your sweethearts to be taken across the seas and to spill their life's blood on the soils of Europe, and then comes to you and asks you to subscribe for Liberty bonds to pay for the expenses of the war. This is the injustice of the war. This is the injustice of the war. And the manner in which officials of the administration are carrying it into effect. Slap the soldier, slap the Liberty Bond, and you've got Teddy a bit peeved. Another one from our man A.C. Townley. The flower of young manhood of this nation is going across the water to bleed, as we are told, for the honor of the country. But it needs some effort for me to believe that these young men are going to fight for freedom and democracy. So there's a lot more here, but the shepherd's crook, I'm trying to keep attentive here. My argument is much more that it's not the socialist aspect, but it's more than anything a grieving father wearing an armband, mourning his son Quentin, and perhaps mourning his own mortality, that really, really develops this anger against an organization that he didn't have a lot of ammunition against. So such words can scald a man. If you're thinking of the things that Townley had said, your son has just sacrificed his life, your favorite, so to speak. And I always come back to the thought that the president had actually lashed out in mourning more than lashed out politically at this time. And really, it was the great adventure, the great life's experience of his son that pretty much guided his words and his activities at this time. And of course, everything kind of collapses thereafter. President Roosevelt becomes even more ill and then passes away about 2 months after this series of speeches. So, but yes.
Thank you very much, Kim Porter.